This is Capturing Light, episode 153, with Mateo Londono.
Welcome to Capturing Light, a director of photographer's podcast, spotlighting cinematography tips, tools, and techniques, inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. And now, your host, Les Gaddis.
Welcome to the Capturing Light podcast. I'm your host, Les Gaddis, and today we are talking to Mateo Londono, an amazing cinematographer. He shot a film called Radical. You definitely want to check that trailer out because when you watch that trailer, you're going to get inspired. It's, just from the trailer alone, I was like, okay, I need to see this movie. We had a good conversation. We talked about working with kids. We talked about just how he navigated the industry. It was cool. I really enjoyed it. So here's that conversation with Mateo Londono. I want to thank Mateo Londono for coming on the Capture Light podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Les. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So where are you based so that, people that know and listen to the podcast, they're wondering, based off of the reference still and watching the trailer, are you in the US? Are you somewhere else?
I live in Mexico City, which is where
Okay.
we shot the film.
Okay, that's awesome. And before we get to the film, let's start talking about your career. Like, how did you, I guess, get into the industry?
I was raised in and about Latin America, mostly in Colombia, which is where my parents are from.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in the U.S., but moved back to Latin America when I was two. So most of my life in Latin America. I moved back to the U.S. when I was 19 because I wanted to work in film, and back then there was very little going on especially in where I was in South America in Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved back to Boston, went to Emerson College, moved out to LA like I guess everybody does to work in the film industry, and I guess it was always my path. I think it was something I wanted to do since I was, I think, 12. I just didn't quite know how to describe it, just because in my world it was just such a foreign thing. Like, I didn't know any filmmakers and I didn't know any directors, and I'd never seen a film camera in my life,
Mm-hmm.
let alone a Panaflex. I had maybe seen like maybe a Bolex. So it was just such a foreign thing to me that I kind of didn't even know where to start, but I knew it was something I wanted to do. And I kind of stumbled my way through figuring out exactly what I wanted to do. I don't know that I knew that I wanted to be a director of photography, because I
Mm-hmm.
honestly did not know what that even was. Like, I didn't know there was such a thing.
Right.
So when I first went to college, I thought, oh, I want to be a director, of course, because I assumed directors were the people that did everything.
Right.
Um, and then you wondered what that really long list of credits at the end was. You're like, why is there all that other people? Doesn't the director do everything?
Right.
And then little by little you discover it's like, oh no, it's a collaboration, and then there's this person. And when I started working through that, I realized, oh, that's the job that I actually like. I don't want that director's job. I want to be that guy, the guy with the camera, the guy that tells a story through images.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I guess once you realized that you wanted to be the guy with the camera, like what was your path to, from that realization to becoming a DP in I guess the sense that we're calling, like being working on movies and things. Um did you just jump right in and start DPing certain projects? I know you said you went to Emerson. Um like what was that, I guess, transition like from kind of starting and realizing that you wanted to be a DP to like where you are now, where you have a film that's about to be released. It's already released where you are, but like doing the whole Sundance thing and like creating great work. Like what was that?
in Mexico, in the arts and architecture, and in cinema, there's just this kind of untethered creativity. Like everybody is just out to do kind of what they feel. And that to me, after having worked in the industry in the US for quite a long time, which is much more restrictive, it was an incredible atmosphere to find here in Mexico. So I kind of moved my target to films here where I was finding stories and finding liberties uh, in a way that was much more the things I was interested in doing.
Right.
Uh, so in Mexico, I've shot, I think, 7 films, and you know, all working up to Radical. And I was still shooting films in the U.S. I shot another film with a lot of the same group in the US before, which was much more in the style of the US. It's a film that I love called The Valet. I think it's an awesome film. But it was much more in that casing of American films, especially romantic comedies. So coming to Radical, which is it like sort of the name states, it's a film that breaks so many rules.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's something that I think that the atmosphere in Mexico really allows you to do.
Right. So how did I guess the film Radical like how did it get brought to you? How did you get brought onto the project? Like how did that whole like the start of Radical for you as a cinematographer start?
So I shot another film in the U.S. starring Eugenio Derbez, who is in both films, called The Valet, and produced by Ben Odell, who produced both films as well. And as I was finishing The Valet, Ben invited me to interview for Radical with the director Christopher Zala. And after a few conversations, I I moved on to this one. So it was an amazing move because it was a lot of the same team,
Hmm.
but in two completely different films. The Valet is a romantic comedy, and Radical is a drama with comedy elements, but it's really a drama.
Hmm.
Um, what was um, what was nice about The Valet is, even though it was a romantic comedy, we really always approached it like a drama, at least from a like lighting and sort of staging point of view. So we really tried not to play it as a romantic comedy as much, just from a cinematic point of view.
Hmm.
And some of that was able to transfer over to Radical, but of course they were very different films. So to me, I was very honored by the opportunity of being able to jump from such different films. Like I said, one that was, a lot of it shot on stage and with like translights and kind of very classic film um, techniques, to Radical, which is really shot on location, even though we built a lot of the sets, but they were built on location. So we're dealing with natural light, and we were dealing with the rain, and we were dealing with a lot of natural elements.
Right. Okay. What was the prep like for Radical? How long did you have to like prepare, get an idea of how you want to shoot it, do, any type of camera testing, anything like that? Like how long and what did it look like from a pre-production um side of things?
I'm trying to remember if I think I had 6 weeks of prep. Um, so as I was finishing the DI on The Valet, I started prep on Radical. I believe I had 6 or 7 weeks. I think I had 1 week of overlap where I would prep in the mornings for Radical while I was grading uh, The Valet at Photochem in LA. And then I think I had 6 weeks with Chris, the director. So Chris and I started breaking down the script and working out the language of the film, and we used the shot designer app to do floor plans a lot of the scenes. the we always wanted this film to be informal from a camera language point of view. Like it's a film about kids. It's a film that we always wanted to keep the energy of the kids in the camera work. So we never had kind of classic coverage. I mean, there's very few scenes that it's like has like a wide and close up. There are a couple, that there's dialogue at a desk in a small office where it's fairly classic. But for the most part, we really tried to not be that. So we even though we kind of planned out the blocking where people were, we also kept a lot of liberty in how we played the camera work. So a lot of the prep that we did was in finding the language more than like really specifying like exactly what the shots were.
Mm-hmm.
One of the aspects that was really important to us in working out this language, and some of the shots that we did kind of very specifically plan, were shots about details. Like we wanted to be able to tell a lot of the story through details. There's a lot of scenes at the beginning of the film where not a lot is said, and you see these little details. And I think Chris was brilliant at coming up with like just one thing that would tell you so much about a character, and he had it very clear. So these were things that he would just tell me, like, okay, this character, we have to see the sweetbreads he's eating because it tells you about him. And so much of what was great in this planning stage was kind of figuring out what these details were and how we were going to shoot these so that we understood who this person was.
Right.
And the film has a lot of different characters, so it's not we have to introduce several different characters, and all this was done through just little details. And that to me is probably one of my favorite things of storytelling is how through just an image how you can say so much about this one character. So that was kind of how we started breaking down these things, and that I would say that took us a very big part of the pre-production.
Mm-hmm.
The other part that took us forever, partly because Mexico City traffic is not great, was scouting. So scouting was a very big part of this of those weeks that we had. We were building a lot of the sets at in real locations, so we had to go out and find where are we going to build the trash dump, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a huge build. And we had to find a place. We obviously couldn't shoot in a real trash dump for
Health reasons and
hygiene,
yeah,
health
for sure.
reasons, and logistical reasons. It's like it was impossible. So we ended up building this trash dump in this area that we found, and of course that required lots of planning because figuring out all this was meant to be natural light, and we were really trying not to be too. We wanted to look very real. So trying to figure out a location that kind of worked, but also was accessible because that's one of the compromises you make when you're making an independent film. You're like, well, okay, that's great, but we can't get trucks or anything. So even though we were trying to be minimalistic, you still need a certain amount of infrastructure,
Right.
getting food and getting bathrooms and getting minimum equipment out there.
Right.
So that was I one of the big challenges was finding these kind of places that looked like they were semi wild or semi out there, but were still accessible, and where you couldn't see the city behind. Because, like, truthfully, at the trash dump, if you turned around, you had city parts. So some of them got erased in post.
Mm-hmm.
This age of digital stuff, they can just airbrush stuff out. But for the most part, we really tried to be very in camera. I mean, there's very few VFX in the film.
But yeah, if you want to kind of lead into the like what you look for or what you were looking for as far as like cameras, lenses, as far as like I guess creating the look that you wanted in this film.
So one of the aspects that Chris Zala, the director, wanted not only from the cinematography, but I feel in general from art, even from the actors, from everybody, was that things didn't feel overly polished. Like we wanted to move away from like a polished Hollywood looking film, and uh, so we worked hard at it being cinematic, but not looking overly polished. So that
Mm-hmm.
went into every aspect of how we approach things. As far as cameras, I picked the Alexa Mini LF because it was the camera that we could build in the smallest configuration, getting the best quality. I had my camera assistant build the cameras down to where they literally had nothing on them. They were just the camera and the lens, like not even a matte box,
Mm-hmm.
with camera, lens, and a monitor. And then everything else was in the backpack: the transmitters, the batteries, the all the other things. We had three cameras. Sometimes, most of the time, we had two, and we had two operators. And the uh, idea was that we would shoot everything kind of from a kid's point of view. So like I said, we tried to build the cameras really small and then always keep them like really low.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in this idea of not making a perfect film, we decided we weren't going to use modern lenses. We kind of moved away. We tested Supreme Primes, which is an option that I liked because of the size of the lenses. But they were almost too. They're almost too good. Too
Mm-hmm.
like too perfect. So we finally decided to go for Canon K35s uh, to have a little more. Uh, I guess imperfection would be the way. A little bit of a softer image.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted kind of we're looking for something with low contrast that and that had variations. Like we enjoyed the fact that the lenses are old and they react differently to flares. We never obviously never had intentional flares, but sometimes there were a light would bounce off the building across the street and would kind of flare the camera. And that
Right.
was part of the spontaneity that we're looking for in the camera work. So the way we configured the cameras, the way we configured the focus pullers, the way we configured everything was the priority was how do we make this spontaneous? How do we make this where we don't have to think about the technology very much? So the
Mm-hmm.
combination of the Mini LF with the Canon K35s, uh, we, uh, we managed to build these packages where the camera operators could almost walk around like it was like a little like prosumer camera, and
Mm-hmm.
especially dealing with the fact that most of the kids weren't actors, like they weren't used to this. Obviously, Eugenio Derbez is you know um, a very seasoned actor, so he's very used to all the cinema paraphernalia. But for the kids, it was important for us to not be super intimidating with the equipment.
Right.
So being able to build them in these ways, and a lot of our testing went into this, and how do we build these cameras so that they're really spontaneous, like we can just shoot, we can move around, and everything was built around that. The lighting was built around that. Like the lighting was super unintrusive. We really tried to avoid having lights on set. We did for some scenes, but for the most part we tried to keep everything outside so that we could almost we could almost point those cameras anywhere.
Right.
For most of the scenes in the classrooms, for example, we shot with three cameras, and the operators had freedom to shoot at least 180 degrees, if not sometimes even more. So that we would keep it spontaneous. The kids didn't really know where the camera was pointing all the time. And obviously the kids are amazing. So the more we moved forward in the schedule, the better they would get. So at the beginning, they were kind of unaware, but truthfully, by like week 3, they would be like, okay, that camera's pointing at me. And, by week 5, they would even know what lens was on it. They were like, oh, is that a 50 millimeter up to here?
Mm-hmm.
So, they were just getting more and more and more knowledgeable. So we towards the end of the schedule, we were able to move a little bit into more conventional uh, film style shooting where we were like more specific about what we were going for. But at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, especially like the first few weeks, we were really just doing it kind of very freelancing. We just put the three operators in there, tried them to not shoot at each other, and then just tried to capture all these things as energetic and as spontaneous as possible.
Right. So how are you communicating the visual language that you've developed with your director and the pre-production stages to your cam operators? Are they cam operators that you work with and you have a relationship with that like you kind of like how are you communicating on set to make sure that you're getting kind of what you plan for?
Well, the communication with the two camera operators that were the principal A and B operators on the film are two people that I've known for quite a long time. They worked with me for years. Actually, one of them, Hector Flores, was my focus puller for a while, and actually, this is the first film that he moved up to operator. And we communicated. I mean, we talked about the scenes a lot before because part of the idea was not to over manipulate the camera operators, especially in the
Right.
classroom scenes. We really were looking for something that was very spontaneous, which is a DP is a little bit of a hard thing to do because we love control. And I think one of the biggest challenges for me on the film was letting go, just
Right.
saying, here's the camera, grab a lens, and get me good stuff. And the
Mm-hmm.
good thing is, they didn't always have to. They didn't have like a specific aim, so they could. I tried to let them be uh, improv with what they were getting because sometimes they were maybe seeing something I wasn't seeing. Chris and I had to be outside of the room, and they were in the room with 25 kids. And a lot of times, they're 13-year-olds. So a lot of times they're screaming. A lot of times they were poking at the camera. A lot of times there's a lot of stuff going on. And the scenes are very energetic. But that was what we were looking for. So the communication mostly at the beginning uh, was before the scene. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, okay, A camera does this, B camera does this, and C camera this, and we'd like set up like say three different lenses,
Right.
and we would just capture things. Then as we, one of these scenes is very long, so as we went through getting the scenes in these blocks, Chris and I started discussing what are we missing, like what do we not have. And like saying the kids were amazing at the beginning, like saying this was all new to them. But as they started understanding how the film process worked, they started becoming very, very aware of in a good way. They started becoming really understanding of the camera. So after a while, it was very easy to just say, okay, we need a close up of this character over here. Or we need this bit over here. So we also, as we went on, we started being much more picky about the bits that we were looking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And at that point, then the communication became much more classic, where we would set up a thing, we put out a mark, and we do like
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff. But that was much later in the process. Obviously, it was different in the scenes with the adults because the adults were actors. So we went through a much more classic approach where we would block a scene, we'd mark it, we'd put cameras, but we still shot everything at least with two cameras. I mean, there's almost no scenes in the film shot with one camera. I
Right.
mean, there may be a few shots, but most of it was meant to be spontaneous. And we actually kind of backed off of trying to make things too perfect. Like as far
Right.
as like the coverage not being exactly matchy. And even in the scenes where it is matchy, we did things like we jumped the line intentionally on a few scenes to, give you a sense of confusion, which is sort of what our character Sergio is going through.
Right.
So I would say it was kind of a mix. I mean, we did use like ear tech comms to at least communicate with the operators, but we
Mm-hmm.
did try and keep that to a minimum. We really tried to let them, kind of do their thing.
Right. Okay. And Well, let me ask, how long was production? Like how many days did you shoot? Approximately, if you remember.
I think we shot for 10 weeks. Wow,
Okay.
it was a long shoot. I don't remember off the top of my head. I really would have to look for
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, just a range, because I wanted to ask, I'm always curious, like from the start of, day one until the wrap, was there like a particular either moment on set that really stood out to you as like, wow, this is like my favorite part of this project, whether it's on camera or behind the camera? I'm always just interested in those moments. Like if you had one that stuck out in your mind as far as like, man, I really loved when this particular thing happened. Um, is there any moment like that that you could share?
Oh, there are so many moments on this film where I knew that we were shooting something magical. Like I was saying, I had already done a movie with Eugenio Derbez, and he is obviously the nicest, most wonderful and generous person. So obviously, every day working with him was fantastic. But the thing that was new to me was working with the kids. And some of them had a little bit of acting experience, but most of them didn't. And being able to capture these moments with them that were so energetic and naive and real um, was amazing. And seeing them develop the way they did was amazing. So the parts that I loved, I mean, from a cinematography point of view, I mean, saying giving up control is very hard, but being able to gain the spontaneity where you're not like trying to get a kid to like hit a mark or catch an highlight or do these kind of things is incredibly rewarding. So I'm very happy for the imperfections in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Imperfections, the cinematographic
Right.
imperfections. I love the energy. I mean, the classroom scenes, when I saw them put together, they're just so energetic. And like saying there's a couple shots that I'm like, oh, maybe we should have done this. But for the most part, I think that the energy we're able to capture is so much more valuable than maybe having, some negative fill that didn't get put in or, you
Right.
know, a kid that didn't move so it wasn't lined up or all these things that as cinematographers we're always looking for.
Right.
So I think my favorite thing about the film is sort of the imperfection of it. I love as a filmmaker to be able to control things to a degree, but to let the spontaneity go. As far as behind the scenes, actually, one of my favorite things that happened is that the town that we're shooting in, which is about an hour away from Mexico City, was full of stray dogs that were very unhealthy. And I think one of my favorite stories about the film is my A camera operator, whose name is Chelsea Briseño, started talking about getting a vet to help the dogs. And she has a dog rescue organization, and she's very into that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she was able to muster everybody to the point where Eugenio jumped in, and we were able to get 30 plus street dogs to get them all vaccinated and treated by vets for all the various things they had, and got them all neutered, so less puppies going around.
Right.
And between the crew and Eugenio, a big part of that, we got this house to get them to convalesce in, and we got a vet out to treat them, and we got a lot of them adopted. So that was one of the kind of behind the scenes things that was really amazing about this team.
Right.
So that was one of my favorite memories of the film was like saying non-film uh, behind the scenes memories was getting all those doggies, healthier. They have a rough
Right.
life anyway, but at
Right.
least for the little bit that we were there, we were able to leave them a little bit better than what we found.
No, for sure. Well, and I'll tell you, like, as far as my experience watching the trailer, because I know the movie's out in Mexico and it's coming out in the US very soon. Um But when I watched the trailer, I immediately thought, wow, what impactful and amazing story that felt very genuine, very authentic. And um, having this talk with you and listening to how you weren't necessarily worried so much about, um, having such a cinematically polished, you know, um, project, it it's one of those things that I didn't even care about that because I was like, man, I'm really connected to the story. I mean, and obviously you want it to look good and, feel good as well. And I just think that it really connects. And I'm excited to see it when when it when I can see it here.
I think you see it like Saturday,
Yeah,
but
hey, that's gonna be my Saturday plans for sure.
yeah, I don't know in the Dallas area what the release looks like, but I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure it's being released in areas that have a bigger Latin audience.
Hmm.
Uh, but Texas is definitely on that list. So um, hopefully you'll get to see it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about inspiration. Like where do you get inspiration from and how do you stay inspired?
In general in life,
Yeah,
or
just in
for
general
this
in life, because
particular film.
I think just in general, because I know like I truly believe that when you're inspired, in life, then it'll trickle into your work, whether it's cinematography or, and I know like life experiences help as well with just where you can collectively pull in your imagery and everything else. So I'm always just curious on like with chatting with cinematographers, like where they find inspiration.
Oh well, I find inspiration just from so many places. I mean, I love photography. I think photography is such a powerful art form. It's such a powerful time capsule. Um, so I don't know, inspiration. I mean, everything from I actually love journalistic photography,
Hmm.
which I love just things that are captured much more than I would be inspired by, like AI photography, which is gorgeous in its own way. It's definitely its own art form. But I definitely like uh, images that are about people. I love portraiture.
Hmm.
Um, with all the conflicts that are going on in the world right now, I mean, in Mexico, we're obviously full of problems, and it seems like the whole world seems to be full of problems. So I get a lot of inspiration from journalistic photography. I love coming through newspapers and seeing what journalists manage to take pictures of, and I try to duplicate that in my cinematography in the sense that I like images that are not overly done.
Right.
I like images that feel natural. So I always look for that. I even look for it in my commercial work, like my advertising work, and it's one of the best compliments I ever get is that it feels like my cinematography is not heavy-handed.
Hmm.
Um, so I think I came very natural to a film like Radical that is not looking for this like uh super perfect, but there's like a sense of just capturedness to it.
Hmm.
I don't know, I would call it documentary style because it's not really that, but I would say journalistic, uh you know is in the ballpark of what I really like. I
Hmm.
like images that are about characters, that are about details, that are about uh, things that we see out there every day. And like living in a country like Mexico, which is just so rich with that. I mean, there is just so many details and characters and textures. Um, I get very inspired by that. I get very inspired by living here, just
Right.
going out in the street and just seeing the characters, seeing the textures of the concrete in the buildings and the paint colors and just everything that we have here. I mean, this is such an inspiring. I think that's one of the reasons that I ended up moving here is because everything is just so inspiring. I mean, every day.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to ask, because I know we're coming up on time, but maybe there's a college student in Mexico that watches this film. And then they're just like, man, like I didn't know that movie making was a thing that I could pursue because I just wasn't exposed to it. But I feel like, with a film like this, it has every, everything to really inspire someone to be like, hey, like I love this film. I want to make films now. Like from the cinematographer, the DP of this film, like what would you tell um that maybe that college student in Mexico or anywhere in the world that may see this and say, hey, I want to make movies? Like what advice do you give them?
Well, I think the film gives them better advice than I can ever give them. I think Chris Zala uh, really nailed it with the advice for kids that want to do anything, not just be a filmmaker, is that they have what it takes to be that. And this film is all about that. It's all about potential. It's all about being able to achieve things that, whether it's because of where or the social conditions you were born in or whatever it is, without talking too much about the story of the film, because hopefully, they'll go see it. This film is all about that. It's all about potential. It's all about, going out there, doing the work and finding the potential in people. So if they want to be cinematographers or directors or actors, I think Radical is like um, the ultimate film about following what you want to do, and that everybody has it in them to become who they want to become.
Right. No, that's awesome. So everybody needs to see Radical when it's available, if it's not available already. How can people find you? Like, do you have a website or social media that they can keep up with what you're doing, Mateo?
Yes, absolutely. People can find me on Instagram as Matt with one T, Londono, like my name, MatLondono. And my website is my name, MateoLondono.com. So some of my work is there, my commercial work, my film work. There's a trailer for my other film with Eugenio, which I also like super love.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and some of my other films that I've shot here in Mexico. And yeah, it's all on IMDb as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting a little bit about how you got started, talking about your film projects and the industry. It was my pleasure for sure. And I look forward to keeping up and watching, all the other great films that you do, including this one.
Thank you, Les. Thank you. Yeah, I have another one coming out next year, which is also a very different kind of film. So that's, I think, part of the fun of being cinematographers. You can kind of change the style of filmmaking you do all the time and keep the challenge always going.
So again, I want to thank Mateo for coming on the Capture Light podcast. You definitely want to make sure that you follow him, keep up with what he's doing, because like he has more films, more greatness coming. So yeah, if you have any questions for me, you can always follow me, Les Gaddis, pretty much anywhere. But primarily on Instagram is most likely where I'd see it. If you wanted to reach out to me, you can send me an email, les@gaddisvisuals.com. Thanks so much for listening. I appreciate you. Be sure to
subscribe wherever you might be listening to this. Share it with your friends. Hopefully it helps. And I look forward to putting out more amazing content. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Capturing Light.
Thanks for listening to Capturing Light with Les Gaddis, a Director of Photographers podcast. Inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. A Gaddis Visuals production.